Ryomen Sukuna is the strongest sorcerer of all time. This isn't debatable, but there's some people who still don't understand why that is. And in today's video, let's talk about exactly that. What's up guys, Restless Gambler here, and in today's video, we'll be talking about the greatest of all time, Ryomen Sukuna. My guy has proven time and time again why he is the strongest, but a certain group of people don't really want to accept it. So I decided to take my time to go over everything they might be confused about to let them know and make them come to terms with the fact that Sakuna is the strongest of all time. Like always, if you enjoy JJK videos like these, go ahead and subscribe. You get more videos and we'll both be happy. When claiming that Sukuna is the strongest of all time, I think universally the first thing brought up is how Mahoraga played into Sukuna's win. Before we get into that, I want to make something clear. There's an assumption from the Sukuna side of things that if Sukuna didn't have Mahoraga, he would have won easily. And on the Gojo side of things, there's the assumption that if Sukuna didn't have Mahoraga, he would have lost easily. To put it plainly, these are both wrong. No matter if Sukuna had the 10 shadows or not, Sukuna versus Gojo is high diff. Gojo himself brings it up, verbatim stating he's not sure if he would have won if Sukuna didn't have the 10 shadows. But going into Mahoraga and the 10 shadows contribution into the fight, I think everyone would agree that this was something that helped Sukuna no matter if you think he needed it or not. A problem arises when the discourse starts around how Sukuna has the 10 shadows in the first place. So that's where we'll start. Sukuna took Megami's body, and because of this, everyone who wants to downplay him brings this fact up, that the 10 shadows isn't his technique. I never understood this logic because we literally see how he took the technique for himself in the first place. Sukuna concocted a plan from chapter 11, used the technique he learned to turn himself into a cursed object, and forcibly took over Megami's body. If Sukuna luckily got the 10 shadows, say if Yuji had the cursed technique when he ate Sukuna's finger in chapter 1 and Sukuna just so happened to take over that body, I would understand the discourse. But Sukuna got the 10 shadows of his own skill. If you're to downplay Sukuna for this, take away all of Yuta's feats or Kenjaku's feats. They both got their techniques from their own skill as well, but their logic applies to them all the more. I don't think I've ever heard someone say some BS like if Yuta didn't have Uro's curse technique, he would have lost to Ryu. You know why that is? It's because Yuta got the technique of his own skill in planning, but the double standard is set for Sukuna for some reason. Actually, we know the reason. It's why I'm making this video. With that said, the discourse about the 10 shadows and Gojo is one I think is more of a way for Gojo fans to boost their ego, taking away a technique Sukuna earned and took for himself to claim Gojo is stronger. When we bring up the fact that Gojo only lasted so long because he learned new domain tricks from the Prism realm, they freeze because the logic contradicts itself. Now, even though it's clear that Sukuna using Mahoraga isn't an anti-feat for him, the point still stands that Sukuna gained this technique to kill Gojo. But the thing is, in story this just wasn't the case. Sukuna promised that he would kill Gojo from chapter 3, he made the binding vow with Yuji before even finding out what Mahoraga was, and after he found out, it made his interest all the more apparent. The fact of the matter is, the main reason Sukuna exited Yuji's body was because Yuji was literally made to entrap him. And so again, he forced his way out with his own skill and gained new abilities because of it. With that out of the way, I think it's time to actually analyze their fight and make my point clearer. The first thing Sukuna focused on with Mahoraga was adapting to Unlimited Void. The thing is, when actually rereading the fight, I noticed that what Sukuna was doing was adapting as a just in case get out of jail card, which we actually see him use in chapter 229. This by itself would sound like an entire anti-feat for Sukuna, but then again, rereading the fight, you would notice how terribly Sukuna was fighting while trying to create this get out of jail card. Apart from the first domain clash, it's actually stated that Sukuna would alternate between using domain amplification and adapting to Unlimited Void. While of course Sukuna, no matter if he used domain amplification the entire time or not, would still get cooked by Gojo in hand-to-hand combat, I don't think anyone would disagree that he would do at least slightly better. And so if you agree on that, you would agree that the adaptation process would have weakened Sukuna up until the point where he used his get out of jail card. Of course, when I say weaken, I mean as in he fights worse than he would if he wasn't cooking up the adaptation. I mean, Sukuna literally says just that. Because he was adapting to Unlimited Void, there was literally no point in which he could use any techniques other than the one the domain was using. Give Sukuna the time he used to adapt to Unlimited Void and let him use it on utilizing domain amplification, and anyone could agree Sukuna can do better in hand-to-hand combat inside of the domain. Now, you might be wondering, why do I keep emphasizing that he can do just a little bit better? Well, the reason Sukuna even used his get out of jail card in the first place was because of his lacking combat inside of the domain. Let me break it down. In chapter 228, we see the outcome of the basketball-sized domain battle. Sukuna destroyed Gojo's barrier, but Gojo cooked Sukuna so bad that he couldn't maintain his domain anymore. They enter another clash in the next chapter and we see it firsthand. Gojo is cooking Sukuna. As a result of this, they break each other's domain at the same time again, but Sukuna's wounds are even worse than before. Gojo punches Sukuna away, they expand their domains, but Gojo is 0.01 seconds faster because of Sukuna's wounds. This led to him getting stun locked and eventually having to use his trump card, Mahoraga. The thing is, we already established that Sukuna would have done better had he focused on using domain amplification. Gojo would still cook him in hand-to-hand combat, but Sukuna would do better. And so if Sukuna doesn't take risks in order to adapt to Unlimited Void and focuses on actually fighting Gojo, this wound would at the very least not make him slower by 0.01 seconds. This isn't debatable, we already agreed he'd do better, it doesn't matter by how much, but 0.01 seconds wouldn't be a problem if Sukuna was using domain amplification more times than he did originally. And so this wouldn't happen at all. They'd break the domains at the same time again and Sukuna would just win with the next domain. Gojo lost his ability to use domain after the 5th one because of him straining his brain, and so just as Sukuna wanted, he just closed his domain and kill him. I don't really see any problems with this line of reasoning. This outcome would still prove to be extreme diff for Sukuna because he himself wouldn't be able to use domain after that one. The next segment I want to talk about is the world cutting slash. From my point of view, the main things people complain about is the path to Sukuna getting it and how Sukuna used it against Gojo. Now, Sukuna didn't look too great while trying to get the world cutting slash. I mean, heck, the guy literally got knocked out in the middle of it. The thing is, first off, he's here because of his risky fighting style in the beginning of the fight, and second, everything that happens to him leading up to his victory was all according to Keikaku. Sukuna gets knocked out cold, but because of that he adapts to infinity and Mahoraga arrives with the results of the risk he took. Sukuna goes on to 1v3 Gojo with his own technique, something Gojo was going to do on a higher scale with Yuta and Hikari, and people try to use this against Sukuna as if this wasn't according to Keikaku. Sukuna hid in the shadows waiting for Mahoraga's second adaptation and he needed another Shikigami to bring it out of him. If Mahoraga arrived and gave him world cutting slash in chapter 232, Gojo would have died way earlier. And that brings me to how Sukuna used it against Gojo. This might be my favorite part to talk about because at the end of the day, we actually never got to see it and we probably never will. First off, I'd like to explain how Sukuna actually used world cutting slash in the state he was at the end of chapter 235. We found out that upon Sukuna seeing it once, he learned to do it. World cutting slash is essentially a dismantle but targeted at the world itself, the space that his opponents exist in. In order for Sukuna to actually expand the target of dismantle to create the world cutting slash, he would have had to make the hand signs he uses for domain expansion. The problem here is that Sukuna had one arm at the end of chapter 235, so it was quite literally impossible for him to use, but binding vows do not abide to impossibilities. Sukuna made a binding vow, essentially giving up the world cutting slash going forward in order to use it once without any conditions. The reason I say that's the exchange is because the new conditions to use world cutting slash were impossible for literally anyone except Sukuna in this true form. This is because going forward, he would have had to chant, make the hand signs, and point to where the dismantle was headed. And if we put 2 and 2 together, Sukuna would have to use 3 arms. So when Sukuna used it against Gojo, he literally did nothing and the slash went straight at Gojo, slicing him in half, and then we got chapter 236. The problem people had with this is the binding vow and the fact that Gojo got hit by it. We already went through the binding vow point. If you watched my video about Comp Yuji, you would understand how powerful binding vows are. The binding vow Sukuna used at that moment made complete sense. The exchange was probably one of the most clear-cut things in the entire series. Use this thing once so you can't ever use it again. Simple as that. As for Gojo getting hit by it, that in itself has multiple points of contention. First of all, I'd like to make it known that Gojo could not just tell that Sukuna had the world cutting slash. This assumption is made from the fact that Gojo had the 6 eyes that can read any curse technique. That's cool and all, but we literally got confirmation that Gojo's 6 eyes doesn't grant him complete omniscience on someone's curse technique. In the Goodwill event, Gojo used Hollow Purple on Hanami. In the actual chapter he uses it, he literally knows that Yuji and Todo are far away from Hanami, so he just ends up going a little crazy and using Hollow Purple on her. Gege actually makes a statement that it looks like Gojo swooped in to steal the kill, but it was just because, listen to this, Gojo did not know the specifics of Todo's curse technique. Hence why he knows that they're far away from Hanami, and hence why he uses Hollow Purple. This just proves that Gojo wouldn't just look at Sukuna and know, oh yeah, he has the world cutting slash. The only thing I would understand is the charge up Sukuna needs to use it, but we just talked about the binding vow. Sukuna used world cutting slash without any conditions. Gojo literally got hit with an attack that had 0 reading for him to predict. As we know, reading the opponent's curse energy is a way for sorcerers to predict their next move, and so if there isn't any curse energy charge to read, what is Gojo dodging based off? We literally saw what happened the last time he didn't expect the slash to get through his infinity and he got blitzed by it. Even worse, Mahoraga swiped his hand while sending it. Sukuna literally didn't do anything. Another thing I want to mention is the assumption that Gojo should be able to see the slash, and even that might not be true. In chapter 224, Sukuna sends a dismantle at Gojo, but notice that he yells it out. Gojo then looks as if he's watching it come at him, but the dismantle actually just attacks the building behind him. Gojo looking back gives credence to the assumption that he literally didn't know where the slash was going, and even worse, he just couldn't see it. Maki later dodges the world cutting slash, but she's the only person, along with Mahoraga earlier in the series, stated to be able to see his curse technique. I don't really understand why there's so much contention about this scene. Of course, I could understand some discourse because we didn't see it, but when we actually think about it, it doesn't seem too crazy as to what actually happened. Let me read out what Gojo Satoru said so we can end this conversation. Anyway, I'm just glad I didn't die because of old age or some kind of illness, but rather because of someone stronger. And the other translation, but I guess I'm glad I died facing a stronger opponent. It would have been embarrassing if I let some disease or old age get the best of me. Beyond all this Gojo talk, I just want to briefly speak about other ridiculous things people say to downplay Sukuna. For one, Binding Vow Merchant. This title for Sukuna comes from his use of different binding vows to aid him in battle. The problem people have with this is that he's using it and not the main cast. Are y'all serious? Gojo spam binding vows during their fight, and just because the other scrubs who get one shot by Gojo and Sukuna aren't using them doesn't mean the strongest sorcerer of all time using them is bad. There's also the point that his binding vows don't make sense, but I don't think you can find a single binding vow he's used that made no sense. Y'all should really switch your focus to Todo and Yuta. All this just emphasizes the huge level of sorcery Sukuna reaches as opposed to the rest of the cast. And even that is a little wrong because the main cast is using them as well. We literally got 2 binding vows revealed in the latest chapter. Stop coping. The only other thing I could find that people are mad about regarding Sukuna is, in quotations, plot armor. Now, if Sukuna survives Jacob's ladder next chapter, which I think would be ludicrous, I'll let y'all have that one. But plot armor is natural for the guy the entire series revolves around, just saying. But just like that, we went through a lot of points today, so let's start from the top and work our way down. Gojo versus Sukuna, no matter if Sukuna has the 10 shadows or not, is high diff, and that isn't debatable. The notion that Sukuna can't beat Gojo without the 10 shadows is something probably led by bitterness, because the fact of the matter is, Sukuna through sheer skill got the technique for himself. Regardless of this fact, Sukuna taking Megami's body wasn't for Gojo in the first place. Sukuna only wanted to leave Yuji's body because Yuji's literal existence was to trap him. During the first round of Gojo vs Sukuna, he used Mahoraga as a get out of jail free card, but the process towards creating the card cost him his own domain expansion. This is because without the process, he wouldn't have gotten stunned by Unlimited Void, he would have held his own to destroy the domain at the same time Gojo destroys his, and he would have been able to use his domain again to kill Gojo. As a result of this risky fighting style, he had to fight in the second round where he decided to utilize Mahoraga to adapt to infinity, something he would have done regardless to evolve his curse technique. In the process, he looks bad, but everything was according to Keikaku, and he used what he learned to kill Gojo. Sukuna used a binding vow that discontinues his use of World Cutting Slash in order to use it against Gojo without conditions, something well within the realm of Jujutsu Kaisen binding vow possibilities. Gojo could not just see that Sukuna had World Cutting Slash because the six sides aren't like that. He couldn't guess that Sukuna was going to use it because there was no buildup of curse energy due to the binding vow, and we already saw the World Cutting Slash hit Gojo with Mahoraga doing even more movement than Sukuna did in that moment. Gojo also likely couldn't even see the slash as we witnessed a lack of awareness for it earlier in the fight. Sukuna's use of binding vows are just a testament of how good he is as a sorcerer, and every binding vow he uses makes sense without question. But now it's time for me to stop yapping and go on to ask, what do you guys think? This break week I have an insane video in the works, and I hope I get to show you guys soon, so do subscribe for that. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like and comment down below your thoughts on Sukuna's Gauntlet, and I'll catch y'all in the next one.